Good morning or good evening, and welcome to the Friends at Home event sponsored by the Friends of the Alameda Free Library. Tonight, we are joined by Philipp Schott, who is talking about his new mystery series. 54 Pigs and Six Ostriches are the first and second book in the mystery series featuring Dr. Peter Bannerman, a veterinarian in a small town on Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. Peter is an amiable, introverted, tea-drinking, obsessive vet who converses more with his dog Pippin than anyone else. When Peter's friend Tom Pearson's swine barn explodes, 54 pigs and one human die. Tom, who's suspected of setting the fire that caused the explosion, has disappeared. Peter has assisted the police in the past and sets out to clear his friend. I am TC Curry from the Friends of the Alameda Library, a nonprofit organization raising funds and advocating for our outstanding public library here in the beautiful city of Alameda, California. These events are free, and you won't be surprised to learn that we appreciate donations. A little later, you'll see a link for donations in the chat thread. We appreciate any donations, large or small, to support these virtual events, as well as many real-life programs conducted at the library. Before we get started, you should know that this is a live webinar and is being recorded. We are posting it later on YouTube, so your microphone and camera are turned off. Please use the chat to introduce yourself, let us know where you're zooming in from, and to ask questions. We'll try to get to all of your questions towards the end of the program. And we ask to make sure that the chat is being used respectfully. So enough about the mechanics, let's move on. Philipp Schott is a veterinarian and is currently chief of staff at a large pet hospital in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He lives with 3 humans and 4 animals in a creaky old house on the river. In addition to the Dr. Bannerman novels, he is the author of 3 nonfiction collections of stories and essays about his 30 years in veterinary practice. The first book in this series, 54 Pigs, has already won the silver medal from the Independent Publisher Book Awards, and he's a gold winner for the Forward Review's Indies Award. So please join me in welcoming Philipp Schott to our program.
Hi there.
Philipp,
Thank you.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by reading a passage from 54 Pigs?
You betcha. It's 54 Pigs. So,
Yes.
Being a mystery, it's always, when I'm asked to read, it's always a little tricky because you don't want to give away plot points from later on. So we're just going to start right at the beginning. So it starts with a little prologue. They were unsettled. The routine had not changed. The lights came on at the same time and they were fed at the same time. But other people were here this morning, yesterday as well. Visitors came from time to time, but rarely in the winter. And there was something different about these visitors. They could not see the visitors, but they could hear them and smell them. Something undefinable about the visitors caused anxiety to ripple through the barn like a wave. But they couldn't act on these uneasy feelings. Instinct said flee, but the doors were closed. And besides, it was very cold outside. And there was no food out there when the world was white. They knew that. Here inside it was warm, and more food would come. More food always came. Yet they were still nervous, so they shuffled and jostled and made noise and sought comfort in each other. Then it was loud, so loud and bright, so bright. Then dark. The world ended. Chapter 1. Peter heard it before he saw it, a deep percussive thud from somewhere ahead and to the left, beyond Balderson's woodlot, loud enough to be heard over the rattle of the truck on the washboard gravel, unexpected enough to startle him. His immediate thought was that it sounded like something massive had been dropped from a great height. Whump. Like a whale or cement truck. Pushing those thoughts aside, he glanced at the clock on his dashboard. 8:33 a.m. Then he saw it. Pillows of smoke began vaulting one over the other as if scrambling to get a better view. the rising column of battleship gray contrasting the bright blue Manitoba January sky. Shit, Peter said to himself as he brought the truck to a stop on a rise that afforded the clearest view. The smoke was definitely coming from the other side of Ed Balderson's place, perhaps 3 kilometers away. That would be Tom's farm. Shit, he said again. He was due at Tom's later that morning, but was expected to Bill Chernoff's first. Forget that. One of Bill's heifers had a cut on her leg, but that could wait. Peter put the new Selfos Veterinary Services truck into gear, spun the tires as he accelerated towards the intersection, turning left instead of right as planned. As he did so, he voice activated his phone. Hey, Google, dial 911. After a brief pause and 2 rings, an operator answered. 911, what is your emergency? An explosion and fire at Tom Pearson's farm, 9 kilometers south of New Selfos and 2 kilometers east of Provincial 59. There was a brief pause and the click, click, clack sound of rapid typing on a keyboard. I have your coordinates. Are you at the fire? No, I'm about 3 kilometers southeast of it. New Selfos Fire Department will know where Tom's place is. 911 calls in rural Manitoba all were routed through the provincial public safety answering point in Brandon, almost 300 kilometers away. Their variable ability to accurately pinpoint the locations of emergencies was a perennial subject of coffee shop deliberation. Are there people in the building? Well, I'm not there yet, so I don't know for sure, Peter. Peter tried not to sound irritated by what struck him as a silly question. But I don't think Tom would be home, and he lives alone. Fire responders will be on their way shortly. Peter took a deep breath to steady his nerves and then sped up as he neared Tom's farm. Peter was right. Should I read on?
Oh, I think that's enough. Okay. It's very, I mean, I'm already engaged, right? So you've got 3 books of essays about your veterinary practice, including How to Examine a Wolverine, which I love that title. What made you decide to make the foray into fiction?
Yeah, so I'd always been interested in stories, right? I read a lot of fiction. I read nonfiction as well, but I read a lot of fiction. And I like telling stories and I like hearing stories. And I wanted to explore a world. I wanted to create a world and then explore this world that I created. And it seemed to me that this would be the best way to do it in a mystery series, because I can take it over a period of time, allow sort of leisurely exploration, if you will, of the characters and of the series. So that's really how the idea came about. I had written a fiction book before, semi-fiction. I also wrote something called The Willow Wren, which was a fictionalized account of my father's experiences as a boy growing up in Nazi Germany. And that's really where that was, that's came out about a year before 54 Pigs. And that's really where I found, I fell in love with writing, that sort of thing.
Wow. So where did the idea for 54 Pigs come from? I mean, killing for 54 pigs, like in the first pages of the book, was a bit startling for me, because you had the prologue, which was, it's like I'm connecting to these pigs, right? And then
yeah. So, and I'll get to in a moment where the genesis of this came from, but as an aside, the book has been well received, lots of positive comments and good reviews, etc. However, one of the negative threads that runs through is, why did you have to kill all the pigs? And in fact, I was invited here in Winnipeg to speak at a book club. And as I approached the house, I could see from a distance they had a giant, this is last winter, giant inflatable pig dressed as Santa on the front lawn. And I come inside and all the cookies are pig-shaped and all the cups and the saucers are pig-shaped. And this book club had the tradition of not reading the book. The host would not read the book in advance and just choose it based on the title. That's what they did. So
wow.
I was really nervous going in there, but they were okay with it. So the pigs all do die, and I've learned my lesson. None of the ostriches die in Six Ostriches. I'm not giving anything away there. 11 Huskies is next, is coming out in the spring, and none of the Huskies died. There you go. But where did this come from? So I weirdly, it just kind of one of these bolt from the blue things years ago, before I had any idea of writing mystery novels. I was writing some essays and a little bit of blogs and so on, but all nonfiction stuff. I was just suddenly presented with this image, mental image, very crystal clear, of a veterinarian in the country. And I'm not in the country, I'm in the big city here, in the country, coming up to a ridge and seeing smoke from a swine barn exploding. I don't know where that came from. And I thought to myself, huh, that would be a great way to conceal a murder.
Mm.
Yeah, as pigs, similar to humans. I mean, ultimately, forensics sorts that out pretty quick, but nonetheless, that was sort of the whole thought process there.
That's interesting.
And
Go ahead.
it just bubbled away in the back of my mind, I guess, for a long time. And then I thought, I'm going to write a mystery. And that came back to me. Okay, this is where we're going to start. This is how we're going to go.
Cool. And you mentioned you live in Winnipeg, which is a population, I looked it up, of about 750,000.
Yeah.
But the book captures beautifully the small town life along the lake. And I love the part of your reading where it's like he's standing on the ridge and it's like, okay, I know how long it's going to take them to get here. If you tell them it's Tom's place, everyone will know how to get there. I mean, you really capture what it's like in small town living. And I'm kind of, how do you know so much about small town life?
I made it up. No, really, yeah, just imagination. And it's a rural part of the country, Western Canada, the prairies. Even though I'm in the city, which I guess for you in California, Winnipeg doesn't sound like a big city, but at 750,000, that is a big city for us.
Yeah.
But you are, inoculated with this. It permeates. It's in the news and so forth. Small town news is all around us. It's part of it's in our gets under our skins, I guess, on the prairies, and specifically New Selfos is it's an imaginary place. So I've had people try to find it. It doesn't exist. Old Selfos itself is a small city in Iceland, but New Selfos is a fictional place. It's meant to be the Cross Lake rival to Gimli, and Gimli is a real place. And Gimli I've been to frequently. It's a beautiful town. If you're ever in Manitoba, it's the largest Icelandic settlement outside of Iceland. There's a whole history there. And I did want to write about that originally. I thought, I'm not really from there. And people will then say, well, you got this wrong, got that wrong. So I said, okay, I'm going to make a copycat on the other side of the lake. Yeah, that's
one of the things that's intriguing about the book. I mean, there are several things about the book that are just kind of new to me. Like, I've never read a novel or a mystery novel that had such strong Icelandic content. Peter's wife, Laura, is Icelandic immigrant, or her parents were.
Yeah.
And so, there's this huge community of it permeates the culture so deeply. And I just realized as I was reading that I've never really read a book that has that as a component before.
Yeah, it was important to me to highlight some unique features of Manitoba for readers elsewhere. We're a small part of the world, like with a population of the province, 1.3 million. You could lose Manitoba and in California, like the people, and you wouldn't find us. We just disappear, right? And it is, I think, what Americans call flyover country, right? We sort of have that in Canada too. People fly from Toronto to Vancouver and they look out the window and say, oh, look at that. There's people living down there. Interesting. But it's so much more, right? There's so much history, culture, and unique elements, quirky elements. I like the quirky, so I wanted to bring the quirky out.
Well, and I had to look up exactly where Manitoba was, and it's pretty much above Chicago, essentially.
Yeah, Minnesota.
Right. So it's interesting that the people started out in Iceland and they ended up like all the way like in the center of the country.
There were, I mean, there is some history. In capsule format, there was a famine in Iceland after a volcanic eruption in the 1870s. And they went people came over to look for open land, and there was open land, and they thought, well, okay, it's a lake where it's a big lake. It's like an ocean. You can't see the far shore of Lake Winnipeg. It is like an ocean.
Oh,
So they could establish a fishing community there and recreate their culture. And they actually were semi-independent for a while. It was the Republic of New Iceland.
wow.
And yeah.
I'm sure that we'll learn more about that history as the books go on. So one of the things that was really intriguing to me is the relationship that Peter has with his wife, and
Right.
they are childless.
Yeah.
They're both very quiet, but they're completely comfortable with each other. I mean, there's
Yeah.
some, occasional friction when she gets mad when he almost gets himself shot, understandably. But basically, it's a very quiet relationship. And that
Yeah.
was also something that, as a part of a childless couple, it was a kind of joy to read. And I realized that I haven't really seen that either. And you yourself live with what, 4 humans?
Yeah, well,
And
there's 2 children. Well, they're young adults now, but they still live under this roof.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what took you to the decision of leaving children out of the equation?
I'm not even sure it was a decision. It just sort of happened, as you're writing the characters. It's a weird thing that, a lot of novelists will describe, and I didn't really believe it until it happened to me, that the characters just kind of take over in a way.
Mm,
Like I started writing these characters, and they just didn't have children. These people, and they're real. They become sort of real people to you. And
mhm.
yeah, maybe I'm leaving the door open. Maybe children will come at some point. I mean, they're getting a little older, so it gets a little less likely. They're in their early 40s. But yeah, that was just the people as they developed. And I'm not one of those writers who comes at it with full-fledged character sheets, everything written out. I've got an
Oh,
idea, like a concept, sort of an image. It's
mhm.
almost more visual than anything. And then I start to write it, and that's the life it takes on, and that's the life that relationship took on, and I'm cool with that. I think it
Mhm.
works.
Cool. So although he doesn't have children, he has a very close relationship with his dog Pippin.
Yes.
And Pippin, he does a lot of smell training, and
Yeah.
evidently Pippin has won contests in this,
Right.
which I had no idea there were contests
Oh
for
yeah.
smell training for dogs. So is that something that you do with one of your dogs, or how do you know so much about it? Because you described it pretty with a lot of detail, which is very
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, thank goodness for the internet, right? That's
Yeah.
where a lot of that honestly comes from. But I mean, legit as a veterinarian, I can sort of source
Well,
legitimate legitimate authorities more easily. But in those sorts of fields, my own dog, Orbit, he's beautiful, beautiful dog, but not very smart. So I'm sorry, I couldn't do that with him, I don't think. I have to thank my editor, because originally Pippin was, I mean, it was a character for sure. And then he, in reading the first draft, said, oh, it's going to be more about the dog. People are going to love the dog. And then, okay, this veterinarian is detective, and we could talk about that, my thoughts on why a veterinarian should be a detective. But it made even more sense when he had a dog that was a super sniffer. And I am fascinated in, and may write a book someday on animal senses. I mean, there have been books written, but animals live in a different sensory universe than we do. And, what dogs, just the one example of what dogs are able to smell is so extraordinary. I mean, it's just
mhm.
beyond imagining in some ways. We have dogs now that can detect lung cancer at a greater degree of accuracy than a radiologist can looking at your chest x-ray, just from sniffing your breath.
Yeah, and I've heard that about dogs. There's a character in Outlander when the couple is in France, and there's a small dog that will um, like jump up onto the bed and sniff around the person, and it's like, oh, here's the problem, right? It's on
Mhm.
their leg, and it's like otherwise you wouldn't ever know that, and that's fascinating. And it seems a shame that we don't leverage that more.
Yeah, communication's a bit of a challenge when it comes to other species. That's one of the problems. I think dogs think we're awfully stupid because they understand us a lot more than we understand them. But
True.
yeah, so Pippin, I mean, he can really drive some of the plot elements because of this ability, and then it gives Peter more of an into the world of crime detection and so on than might otherwise be. And of course, there's his brother-in-law. Laura's brother is an RCMP officer, so that's the other way that he connects into that world.
Right. And he's a delightful character. I really like him. Um,
Yeah,
he's like this big Viking dude, you know,
yeah.
and as opposed to his wife, who's very petite and small. So it's an interesting juxtaposition. And I'm, also looking forward to get to know him more as
Hmm.
the series goes on.
Yeah, no, he's becomes more and more part of it. And 11 Husky's the one that's out next spring. He's even more, and there we get to meet his boyfriend. He goes
Ah,
as well, becomes a significant character in them.
hmm. I'm wondering, like, how much of you is in Peter Bannerman?
Well, originally I would have said, none. I've created this person just from my imagination. However, I've been
Hmm,
told by people who know me
hmm,
that that yeah, there's a lot obviously drawn from me, I guess. I mean, he's an extreme form of me in some ways.
hmm.
Some of my traits, some of my quirks then taken a little further along to a little bit more, dramatic, if you will, or a little bit more out there. So yeah, a lot of that, a lot of his, most of his arcane knowledge is my arcane knowledge, and certainly the geek element. He and his wife, I mean, they're Dungeons and Dragons fans and Lord of the Rings, and that's yeah, that's me. I mean,
You.
look over my shoulder, you can see there's some Playmobil and Lego there in the corner, and so that's yeah, that's totally me. Tea
Yeah,
drinking, yeah. I mean, I like my tea, but again, I amped that up a little bit, and
yeah, he's a bit obsessive about his tea. We will time it for
timing it and
exactly
all
like
that. Yeah.
right. And is that something that you Googled too to find out, what is the optimum seeping time for Lopshong Asuka or whatever?
Lapsang Souchong.
Thank
This is
you.
the time of year for Lapsang Souchong up here anyway, because that's a smoky tea. And so
Mm,
that smoke works well in the gray of November and up here anyway. So yes,
hmm.
yes, I believe I probably Googled that. Some of that I knew and some of it I didn't. Yeah.
I was really enjoying also his wife has this scientific background, but she
Mhm.
makes her living knitting geeky sweaters and hats and
Yes.
scarves and sorts of things. And
Yeah.
that's really delightful. And it kind of interesting um, career twist for
Yeah.
just in general as a person. Is that one of those things that, she just showed up as a character with that, or,
Pretty much. Yeah.
okay.
Pretty much. I mean, so yeah, again, parallels. My wife, also a veterinarian,
Ah,
but has been very part-time for a number of years, and her real passion is pottery. So
mm,
that kind of artistic element, I guess, runs through a lot of people I know, and I want to bring that in. And yeah, somehow yeah, I don't know where that came from too. I mean, in Six Ostriches, we get a little more of the connection to the sheep rearing world, and
mm.
that's in the next book. So there's some, it allows me to tie some other things in, and I just create some other plot elements. Like it could have been something else, right? But it just happened
Yeah.
happened to be that. It's just something fun to play with.
There are a lot of animals in New Self Loss.
Mhm.
And I don't know whether that's just because um, it's what works for the plot.
Well, there's
But
that. Yeah.
I mean, Six Ostriches, you've got this guy starting an ostrich farm, and there was the pig farmer and, you know, um, Is
Rural Manitoba, there are a lot of animals for
okay.
sure. Exotic farms with ostriches, actually, it's legit. Far end, but the other end of the province near Dauphin, which is towards the Saskatchewan border west of us. There was one for a time. I don't think it's running anymore. So
Mm.
all these things have some kind of basis in reality. I may have just amplified it a little bit. I mean, they're meant to be, the books are really meant for entertainment, rather than for instruction, right? So,
Well, yeah, definitely. Did you start out thinking that this was a series?
yeah.
Because you've put the two books out already, and you've got a third one out. Did you, when you wrote the first one, did you think, okay, this is going to be a series, and
Yeah.
then think about it in those terms?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I wanted to do with this, is this idea of setting up a place, giving it a sense of place, and I have this fictional town in rural Manitoba, really my idealized town. Now, honestly, I don't know. Hopefully, there's no rural Manitobans listening, but a lot of it is pretty boring. A lot of the small towns. So I was always very disappointed going visiting small towns. So I wanted to idealize one, and just the kind of businesses that would be there and the quirky, interesting people that would be there. And I want to play with that over time. And then the characters too. I just want them
Right.
to follow those. They become, it's cliche, but they become sort of friends, right? And
Yeah.
it's sad at the end of a book when you've written a book that now that's done. But nope, this gets to go on for as long as people want to read them. And then I have a very kind of structured, organized mind. So in this series it's working through the seasons.
Hmm.
54 Pigs is set in the winter. Winter is a character in a sense in the book. It plays an important role. Six Ostriches in the
Absolutely.
spring, 11
Right.
Huskies is in the summer, Three
Okay.
Bengal Kittens, just started writing it, out in 2025, is in the fall. And
Mm.
then we'll get back to winter again. And then so far, a little hint for the reader, potential readers, then there's always murders. Of course, these are murder mysteries. The motive of the basic motives for murder each time, and there's half a dozen or so. Each time, it's a different one. I'm going to work my way through all of them. Not have to
That,
start again at the beginning, but
yeah, I was going to talk about the setting of winter,
Mhm.
and how it really plays a role in the whole story. And I really enjoyed that. And it was one of your reviewers said something about that as well. It's like that you really capture the sense of being in winter. And,
Mhm.
like he walks to his job in the middle of winter, and you know, bundles up, and it's like, oh, it's a balmy -4 out now. It was -30 earlier, but it's now only -4. And as people who live in California, most of us, which is a very mild climate, and I grew up in the snow in Colorado, and it's like, oh yeah, like no. Um, eh, I'm not sure that there's a question in there, but just um what joy do you find in winter yourself
Yeah.
that you can bring to the page? Because it really, like you said, it really does become a secondary character.
No, I mean, I love it, and I guess I'm unusual that way. But even here, there's plenty of people that live here that don't like it, which I find kind of bizarre because it is a
Mm,
free country. You can move somewhere else. But the I there's a sense of freedom in us, perversely, although you're bundled up, so you're maybe less free. But it just, when you're in this wide open space, it just you and the elements and
mm,
this, all the, a lot of civilization and modernity and so on kind of falls away.
mm,
So something kind of very, it feels freeing to me, which is a very strange thing to say. It's refreshing. I mean, you really, if you've been out when it's really cold, and once you step back inside, you're energized. It's like a cup of coffee,
mm,
better than a cup of coffee, really, in that way. So in a very small way. And it's beautiful, it is beautiful and it is rare, this changing world. It's a cliche to say, but winter is the kind of classic winter that we have here. It's a scarcer and scarcer part of the human experience, right? 95% of people will never get to experience that. But so it feels like a privilege as well to have that. And just the contrast. I mean, we have 4 strong seasons. It gets very hot here in the summer as well. It feels like you get to live in 4 different countries without traveling. So there's lots, but it's primarily it's the beauty and the sense of freedom and the freshness. The air is like champagne. It's just crisp. If you like dry champagne, I'm not talking the sweet stuff, I'm talking the really good stuff. Dry, crisp, just I don't know. You have to experience it, I've got a lot of family in Germany, and they when they come over, they want to come in winter because for them also they have childhood memories of what winter used to be like, and things have changed even faster there than here, and they love coming over for a few days.
Right.
It does go on fairly long, so maybe tiresome for some people, but
right. Well, I'm interested, you said you're thinking about it as a series, and I'm wondering how you decided on the animal number construct for the titles of your book.
Yeah. So 54 pigs. Well, so 54, first of all, I wrote it when I was 54 years old, so that's where I pulled that number. And it just struck me as kind of, I guess, cute in a way. And so each number, I like things that are coherent like that. Each one has a different, same design, cover design, but different color scheme, and then the numbers like that. I haven't been assessed as being on the autism spectrum. I don't think I am, but it is a spectrum after all. Both my kids are, my brother is, my father was. And, for those who haven't read the book, Peter Bannerman is, and it's, on what's called high functioning, what people used to call Asperger's. It's no longer a term that's used, but not officially, but that, I guess, is a little nod towards that because he's very mathematically inclined. Right away in the first chapter, a little further along, he's calculating things and trying to understand the world through a logical framework. He doesn't believe that anything just is completely random. He said there's always kind of antecedents. There's always reasons why things happen. You just have to have enough data to kind of sort that out. So this is his approach to the world. And I guess the numbers and the titles are a little hint towards that, a little nod towards that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like dropping in. He's awkward around people. It's like, okay, here's this person, and is this a time that I should hug? I'm not really a hugger kind of person, but I'm not really sure if this is, so I'm just not going to, so there's a lot of that social awkwardness that people around him are accepting of, that he himself is very aware of.
Yes.
Is very self-aware.
It creates a blind spot that becomes important in the novel in terms of how things ultimately work out, something that he really misses seeing because of his inability to really understand people and their emotions and their motivations and so forth. He finds much more comfort and security in a world of logic and calculation and rigid rules.
So what is next for you?
Well, there are more Bannermans. As I said, 3 Bengal kittens is coming up. 11 Huskies is coming up. It's done from my perspective, but it's not appeared yet. It's out in May, and then 3 Bengal kittens.
Is that Bengal? I'm sorry, but is that Bengal tiger kitten?
No. Kittens. Bengal is a breed of cat.
Okay.
Yeah. We actually just went through this. Do we call it 3 Bengals? No, people are going to think tigers. We're going to call 3 kittens. That's kind of lame, kind of a little meh. So no,
Yeah.
3 Bengal kittens, and people
Okay.
wonder. Yeah, on the cover it'll be obvious that there was little
Right.
kittens.
Yeah, you
But
talk.
I have just written. It's doesn't have a publication date. I've written a book called Heal the Beasts. It's a history of veterinary medicine written
Hmm.
for the general public. So there 20 chapters, 21 actually, of each one starting with a little vignette, a story of a historical veterinarian, some of them fictional, because reaching way back into history, I don't know the name of a Babylonian veterinarian, but we do know that there were some. Hammurabi's code actually, first written legal code, actually had the amount that a veterinarian could charge for a surgical procedure that was in there.
Wow.
So each starts with that, and then I tell some stuff about that era and about the evolution of veterinary medicine. And it's really about the evolution of human empathy for animals and caring for animals. Not really an evolution, it's a little cyclical as well. But so anyway, that's written. It just needs the editorial process and so forth.
Hmm. Well, and that's something about the books that I really enjoy is you see Dr. Bannerman in his practice dealing with normal animal processes as
Right.
well, and he's done something like 1800 um, spay and neuter. Um,
Could be. Yeah, I
it's
don't.
like, wow.
Yeah. It's interesting you raise that, because I certainly have had people say that they want more of the veterinary detail in there.
Mm,
It's hard to write into a mystery with and have it sort of make sense.
right.
So I do bring a little more in, but it's not going to be very much really. The Because yeah, but it still has to, we still want to, people that are reading mysteries want the
Right.
plot to move forward,
Right.
want to meander down some side lane of
Right. But
veterinary. But
but
I
this
really do, I I enjoy those parallels. And this is really part of the reason for you to go back to an earlier question you asked, why I've written a mystery too. And I think it occurred to me that what we do as veterinarians is really similar to detective work, more
mm,
similar than what human doctors do, right? Because we are typically dealing with limited information, limited
mm,
evidence, because there are economic constraints. In the US is a little different, I suppose, but we have socialized public healthcare, so whatever needs to get run for tests gets run. There's no cost limitation, right? The But in veterinary medicine, we're constantly, okay, we can afford to run this test, or we can do this test, and so bits and pieces of evidence come together. So it's the one thing. And the other is that we're dealing with uncooperative witnesses, essentially. The
mm.
patients are uncommunicative and uncooperative. So we're really trying to unravel mysteries, medical mysteries. So I think it's a very similar mindset, a similar problem-solving kind of logic is required
Yeah, that
to
makes
be a
sense.
successful veterinarian as to be a detective. So
That makes sense. And it's fun to meet the people in the town. And, it's like the biker dude with his
right.
like it's like, oh, it's like you get around an animal and he just melts, I love
And
reading
he's
about
based on
stuff
a real
like that.
person too.
Oh,
A lot of these are, yeah, that's, what I tell vet students when they come, and I said, the number one thing you got to learn is this is a people business that happens to involve animals, not the other way around. And once you
right.
start to not just accept that, but embrace that, that's when it becomes fun, because otherwise you're just going to beat your head against the wall trying to get people to do what they need to do for their animals. If you're not able to connect to the people and really celebrate and enjoy who they are, they're going to read that off you, and you're not going to get very far.
Yeah, that makes sense. If there's any of our listeners who have questions, we would love to hear from you now. Just drop them into the chat. Um, I'm just trying to think of what I've missed about it. Um, I've read about a half of the ostriches book. Six
Yeah.
Ostriches. And fascinating animals. I mean, I've had an ostrich egg before, which
Yeah.
is like enormous, and kind of startling. But I didn't realize the whole thing about the stomachs.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, like any bird, but just in a large scale. So the proventriculus and the gizzard, two different stomachs there. The ostriches. The reason I wrote about ostriches, there's another one of those things. I was because that book also involves. I'm not really giving anything away by saying it involves kind of neo right-wing white nationalist neo-pagans. I was
Mm.
reading about that, the rebirth of Norse religion, primarily not that way for most of them, very lovely people, but there's an element that goes down the white nationalist path. And at the same time, a picture of an ostrich popped in my head. I said, how can I connect these things? And so you'll find out in the first chapter how I connect those things. But I had a real experience with an ostrich. This goes back to vet school, but we had an epileptic ostrich in the
Wow.
hospital at the university. And you can imagine these things are huge, right? They're 6 feet tall, so taller, 7 feet. Giant claws at the ends of their
Right.
feet, like railway spikes. They disembowel you and like that. So when it throws an epileptic fit, watch out. But what we learned is ostriches like to peck at white things. We had to take our lab coats off lest it peck at the buttons. So to give an ostrich medicine, here's a tip for you ostrich people out there. Put it in a marshmallow. And the
Oh,
ostrich will snatch so that's how we medicated the ostrich for its epilepsy, by putting it in a marshmallow.
it's interesting. And from a craft perspective now, there's kind of two camps of fiction writers. The plotters and the pantsers. So the plotters will sit down and, as you kind of referenced earlier,
Hmm.
write out the whole plot line.
Right.
And the pantsers are just like, oh, yeah, I have this image in my head and let's just see where it leads.
Yeah.
And Diana Gabaldon writes, she's very much a pantser, and which I appreciate because I write that way too. It's like, how am I going to outline something? I have no idea where this is going, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I love to talk about craft and about
Mhm.
how long did it take you to write the book and then get it published? Because I think people
Yeah.
often think that it's a really fast process. And it was something that really surprised me when I started researching.
Yeah. So I'm fast and slow. So the writing for me is pretty fast. Like I'm pretty efficient. I've got time constraints. I'm still in practice and I have a family and so forth. I like to say I am German, so I'm very efficient. I do, and I'm very organized. I write 3,000 words a week, come, heck or high water. And that's what I
Oh,
do. And so it takes me 20 weeks to write 60,000 words, which is the average length of a
mhm.
mystery novel, 60 to 70, somewhere in there. And I just do it. Then and I write pretty clean copy, not to sort of laud myself, but
Mm,
there's not a whole lot of drafts required. I do it, it's all in my head first. I write in my head as I'm walking. I walk a tremendous amount, like
mm.
10 to 20 kilometers a day. And it's happening in there, and then I just get it on paper. The publishing process is another story. So then it gets to the hands of the editors and so forth. The whole pipeline is at least 18 months in most cases, at least with my publisher. So from the time I start writing to the time it appears on the shelves is a good 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, cool.
And I am a
Well,
pantser, I guess. I've never heard that expression before, but I guess I am.
yeah, yeah. There's I'm no longer on Twitter, but the writing community there's a lot of conversation about that, and that's a lot of fun. I know Anne Perry, who is
Mm-hmm.
extraordinarily prolific. I saw her at a writers conference, a mystery writers conference, and she meticulously outlines everything, like in detailed outlines. And then she just sits down and writes it. But she's awesome. She's in her 80s And she writes
Yeah.
out everything longhand and then hands
Wow.
it to her assistant, who types it all into the computer, and then everything happens, you know,
I don't
that way.
think
It was
I'd be a
like,
writer without a
oh,
computer, even with the typewriter days. I did a little bit of writing back when, and it was just so laborious. And I just need to, because as I say, I write pretty clean copy.
mhm.
That means as I'm writing, I'm editing as I'm writing. So I'm going back, delete, move this around. So that's all happening simultaneously. And that would be just so so laborious. Kind of don't think I think I'm too lazy to do it the old
Well,
fashioned way.
yeah.
I just don't have the energy. The,
And I
yeah,
go
but
ahead.
I do it because it's fun. I really do enjoy it. And it just, once you get into the flow of the story, it just wants to go, right? It really
Right.
wants to go. And
Well, and I think the end result of all of that is like you figure out what works for you and do
mhm,
that. You
yeah,
know, a lot of
everyone's different.
people,
Everyone's totally
right.
different.
And, you know, people get tied up in, well, I should be doing, like, no, there's no should. Are you writing? Yay.
Yeah,
Like, go for that.
yeah,
So, could you read us a little bit from the Six Ostriches?
you bet. Six ostriches. See, similar cover format,
Yes. Yeah.
just
That's what
different
made
colors.
me that's what made me ask if you had started out thinking of it as a series, because,
Yeah.
you know, the covers are obviously thought out in that way.
Yeah. I mean, that's all thanks to the publisher and actually the big bookstore chain in Canada, Indigo, Chapters Indigo, insisted that there be the detective, so to speak, be on the cover. Originally, it just had the
Oh,
animals. So anyway, I think that works pretty well. See, there's a little metal detector there that comes into play.
it,
So we start again with a prologue. The fence was gone. Yesterday it was there, but this morning it was gone. He ran toward the opening. Maybe the man took it away. Maybe it disappeared. Much was unfamiliar in this country, so everything was possible. The others stood back. They were cowards. He was the leader for a reason. There was no danger. He knew this. This was an opportunity. That's what it was. Let the cowards miss out. He crossed into the new territory and looked about him. The grass was much longer here, and it whirred and clicked and buzzed with many different kinds of insects. Insects, tasty plants, paradise. Towards the shrubs, it was wetter, and there were even more insects and tender-looking shoots. He trotted to this spot and began to peck at everything, gorging like a child let loose in a world made of candy. Then something caught his eye. It glinted in a shallow pond. It was like a piece of the sun. He was so clever for coming here. The cowards would not get this delicious morsel. But it was not delicious. The piece of sun was beautiful, but it tasted of nothing as it went down his long throat. It should have been warm and soft, but it was cold and hard. It had unpleasant edges and corners. This was surprising. It was nothing like what he imagined eating a piece of the sun would be like. He began to consider the impossible, that he, the leader, had made a mistake.
mhm.
I read on a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Chapter 1. Dr. Peter Bannerman and the ostrich stared at each other. Even though Peter was 6'5", the ostrich was still taller than him, so Peter had to tilt his head upwards to get a good look at the bird's eyes. Caution was warranted around ostriches, but there was a strong fence between them, so he was safe from kicks. A quick, sharp peck was not out of the question, though. Peter didn't get any closer than necessary. How long has he been off his food, Dan? At least a week, and he's hardly been passing any droppings. I think it started when I led him into the new pasture on the north side. Dan Favel, a powerfully built middle-aged Métis man with an iron gray brush cut and an impressive mustache, looked mournful as he said this. Dan had recently taken early retirement from the Royal Canadian Air Force to start his dream exotic livestock farm on the edge of New South Wales. I thought I was doing them a favor. The grass and the bugs were so good over there. Too good, do you think? Did he overdo it? Maybe, Peter said as he continued to consider his patient from a safe distance. I'll be honest, Dan. This is my first ostrich patient, so I'm going to have to do some reading before I assume that I can just extrapolate from chickens and ducks. Did you hear that, big bird? The doctor's going to do some studying and then he'll fix you up. Dan's gentle, childlike sing-song was in comical contrast with his military bearing. Big Bird? Is that his actual name? Peter asked. Yes, Dan beamed. And that's Ernie, Bert, Mr. Hooper, Oscar, and the Count over there. He indicated to a corral on the far side of the house where 5 ostrich heads bobbed above the high wooden fence. But they're all girls except Mr. Bird and Mr. Hooper, except Big Bird and Mr. Hooper. I figured ostriches don't care about gender identity, and my granddaughter loves their names. No, I don't think they care, Peter chuckled. Is there anything you can do today while you're here? Well, it doesn't hurt to take an x-ray of the proventriculus. The what? It's sort of his first stomach. Pro means before, and ventriculus means stomach. It's the first place the food comes after traveling down the esophagus, and it's a common place for blockages to occur, at least in other bird species. The gizzard is the next stomach, and that's where all the grinding happens. Because birds don't have teeth, big chunks can go down and get stuck before they reach the gizzard. Dan rubbed his chin. Sounds like a design flaw. The gizzard should be first. Ha! Suppose you could argue that, but the proventriculus secretes digestive juices that soften the food and make the gizzards work easier. Okay. So you can x-ray here. For sure, I'll just run to the truck and grab my portable unit. In the meantime, you can round Big Bird up, hood him, and get him in a position where I can approach his lower neck from both sides.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you so much for a
Oh.
really enjoyable conversation. I hope that people are intrigued. There is a link in the chat, which will take you directly to the Books Inc. page where you can purchase these fun books. And I hope this talk has motivated you to do so. For those of you in Alameda, the Alameda Mystery Book Club is going to be discussing 54 Pigs later this month. And gosh, thanks, Peter. This has been a really enjoyable conversation, and
Thank you.
I've learned a lot about animals and Canada and Iceland from talking to you. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Absolutely.
So just in closing, again, I want to remind folks that both 54 Pigs and 6 Ostriches are available locally at the Books Inc. A reminder to consider a donation to the Friends of the Alameda Free Library at the alamedafriends.com or through the link posted in the chat. It will help us continue to produce events like this one. Also, if you have a friend who missed this talk, you can tell them it will be available on YouTube in the next few days. They can check the alamedafriends.com website for a link. Our next Friends at Home event will be a docent talk on Wife's World, 3 Generations of American Artists. Please join us when Janine Lucelle Newburn, a docent with the Phoenix Art Museum, will take us on a journey through the wondrous and strange world of 3 generations of the Wythe family, focusing on the works of N.C. Wythe, Andrew Wythe, and Jamie Wythe. This talk explores the similarities and the differences between these artists. Join us on next Wednesday, November 15th, for this fun talk at 7. Our next author talk will be on December 5th at 7 p.m. We'll be discussing Becoming Ella Fitzgerald, the jazz singer who transformed American song, with author and professor of music history, Judith Tick. I would like to thank the team that makes these events happen: Karen Manuel, Karen Romer, Renisha Robertson, Kumar Fanse, Karen Butter, Billy Reisenschmidt, and Carrie Miller. And a special thanks again to Philip for an informative and entertaining program. And finally, thank you to you for joining us this evening.